Hello again, and welcome to this second segment of the first online mini tutorial about urban culture, where we will look at the texts that we're reading for this tutorial together. So the first text I want to mention is Michael Borer's 2006 article, The Location of Culture, the Urban Culturalist Perspective. But we will begin here by looking at the second article or the second text by Sharon Zukin from 1995, Whose Culture, Whose City? It's actually an extract from her book, The Cultures of Cities. And we begin with Sharon Zukin. So Zukin is a sociologist at the City University of New York, Brooklyn College. Broadly speaking, we can place her work within the neo-Marxist approach to urban studies. This approach has been dominating urban studies in many ways, influencing urban studies since roughly the 1970s onwards, with many towering figures like Henri Lefebvre, David Harvey, Manuel Castells, Doreen Massey, and many more. So we can ask, to begin with, the question, what's important to a Marxist analysis of urban culture and cities in general? Well, the economy, of course. Or to put it more precisely, a Marxist analysis will look at the divisions over the capacities of humans to transform the world and fulfill their potentials. These potentials are distorted by the class power of capitalists for their own gain, leaving workers instrumentalized, exploited, and alienated. So the first question I propose you keep in mind when reading the Zukin text is, how is this neo-Marxist perspective expressed in her arguments about the symbolic economy? Indeed, what is the symbolic economy? Try and think about that when you read her text. One way of going about this is to look for one key component in practically all Marxist analyses, of course, class. Capitalism and class struggle, a Marxist scholar will tell us, saturates urban life. Urban life becomes conditioned by capitalism. The social inequality underpinning capitalism is structural. And this means that class is not just one of many more or less random markers of social identity, it's a defining factor. So when reading Zukin, ask yourself, how does she address and discuss class in the context of urban culture? How does she attempt to show that the division of labor leads to exploitation? So the Marxist and neo-Marxist perspective also generates a particular understanding of the city, which proceeds from the fact that if we're talking in an urban context, land or space itself is a commodity, or it signifies a commodity. Urban space, like any other thing, is transformed by the value of labor into an exchangeable good or property. Or put differently, the use value of urban space is transformed through the processes of capitalism into the exchange value of land. Hence, an urban system is necessarily based on relations of production. And these relations are prone to abuse and exploitation. So ask yourself, when reading the text, how does this come to expression? What are the parallel production systems that Zukin argue are crucial to a city's life under capitalism? And what are the consequences of these systems for urban life? All right. We now turn to Michael Borer's take on urban culture. Like Zukin, Borer is a sociologist. He works at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. To differentiate his approach from other urban sociological approaches, he argues that culture should be put at the forefront. So to begin with, let us ask ourselves, how does Borer understand and define culture? This is crucial. And what does he mean when he requires us to pay attention to the two phases of culture? What are these two phases? And what are the consequences of thinking about culture in this way? Borrow's aim, as I said, is to set out a particular approach. He calls that an urban culturalist approach. He contrasts his own approach to three other existing and dominant approaches in urban studies. The first is the Chicago School of Urban Ethnography, also known as urban ecology. This has been a tone-setting, paradigmatic approach to the study of life in cities, dating back to pioneers from Chicago. Then there's, as we have already talked about, the neo-Marxist approaches, also known as urban political economy. And then there's the LA school, also known as postmodernist urban studies. So a question would be, how does Borrow contrast his urban culturalist approach to these three other schools? Why does he find the three other schools problematic, and what's problematic about them? And specifically, he spends a lot of energy on critiquing the neo-Marxist approach. So what is wrong with the neo-Marxist approach, according to Borrow? And also pay attention to the fact that he makes a partial exception for Zukin that you have just read. So ask yourself, why this partial exception? I think what you will find by comparing the two texts is, of course, a different set of emphases, different perspectives on the city and urban life. So what are the consequences of these different ways of seeing the city? In order to answer this pretty broad question, I suggest that you look at the 6 domains of research that Borrow points out in his article. What is Borrow interested in when he looks at cities and their cultures, and why? So finally, let me remind you that the point here is not necessarily for you to decide who's right here. I mean, both perspectives can be considered right in the right circumstances. In fact, there may be more overlaps and shared concerns between the two scholars than you may expect. Indeed, when it comes to public space and public culture, it seems that both Zukin and Borrow are hopeful, actually. So how and why are they both hopeful? What kind of expectations and hopes do they have for the transformative role of culture and space in cities? All right, there you have it. These are my suggestions for what to look for when you read these texts. I hope you enjoy the reading and the thinking process it generates.